Hello and welcome to Recharge Wrestling. We are here to plug you in to the world of professional wrestling. I'm Keeney and I am here today to talk through the first night of the WWE draft. So it took place on SmackDown. We had half of the roster eligible for the draft. I'm just going to run through the results of the draft and then talk about kind of what that means going forward and what to look forward to on Monday. So it was done uh, very very slowly. I think they basically did two picks per round and did four rounds on the show. So essentially, only eight draft picks per Raw and SmackDown. Now, at the time of recording, there is other draft picks that will have happened before Monday. I think it's happening on SmackDown Lowdown this morning. So it probably this will probably be outdated quite quickly, but there will be more draft picks to come. But I imagine there'll be the lower down the roster draft picks. But what we saw on this episode of SmackDown, so for Raw, the eight picks were Cody Rhodes, number one for Raw, Becky Lynch, Imperium, Gunther, Ludwig Kaiser, and Giovanni Vinci, Matt Riddle, Drew McIntyre, The Miz, Shinsuke Nakamura, and the NXT Women's Champion, Indy Hartwell. And SmackDown got the Bloodline, as they called it, but that includes Paul Heyman, Solo Sikoa, and Roman Reigns. SmackDown also got Bianca Belair, the Raw Women's Champion, Bianca Belair, the Street Profits, Edge, Bobby Lashley, the OC, which contains Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows, Mishin, and most importantly, AJ Styles. Damage Control next. That's Bayley, Io Sky, and Dakota Kai. And the last pick for SmackDown was the NXT Women's Tag Team Champions, Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. So really interesting graphics. And like I mentioned before, they did it round by round, and we had legends come out: RVD, Michael Pietez, Teddy Long, JBL, and then Shawn Michaels and Road Dogg Jesse James. So they had legends come out and announce the draft picks one by one. Triple H did the first round, which is a fun way of doing it, and cool to see some legends. But I do wish we'd have had some kind of general manager types. And so when originally we saw RVD come out of Raw's locker room, I was like, hang on, is this been RVD as the GM? But no, it didn't mean that. So that was an interesting way of doing it, and better than just having Stephanie McMahon just read names off a list. It seemed a bit better to have back and forth. You definitely saw a bit of back and forth between Road Dogg and Shawn Michaels in the last round, where they picked the NXT ones at the end. But let's just go through it. I'm going to start with SmackDown because this was SmackDown show and they had first picks on this show. And interestingly, historically, they've done three Raw picks against two SmackDown. They basically were 50-50 here. So an interesting development. I'm sure more will get picked on Raw over time, but so far it's 50-50 from the first eight picks each. So Roman and Solo on Raw, on SmackDown, Roman and Solo. Interesting because of the USO dynamic. And we saw actually on this show the WrestleMania main event rematch, the Usos against Sammy and Solo. The Usos against Sammy and KO. And some more very clever backstage segments with Paul Heyman where he's talking behind the Usos. They think they're talking to him, but he's actually talking to Solo, saying, "This is your night." And so there was just a few back and forths there. You know, Sammy and KO had a bit of a battle with him on the mic at the start of the show on the stage, and saying that, you know, you should be worried because they've drafted Roman and Solo and not the Usos. And I think even commentary played up as well. I think Michael Cole made a comment in the main event saying maybe Roman's pulled some strings that he wants Usos drafted later so he can see how they got on, to see where they go. So that's going to be one of the most interesting things about Monday is what happens to the Usos. Because it was strongly inferred on the show that Solo was going to take out the Usos. That was very strongly inferred. And he came out during the match looking like he was going for them. But Matt Riddle foiled those plans. KO and Sami retained. The Usos lose. They've let down the bloodline, explicitly said by Michael Cole at the end. So the Usos might be the most interesting draft pick on Monday. Wherever they go, Raw or SmackDown will be interesting, because either if they go to Raw, they're at the bloodline. They go to SmackDown, and this story carries on, which I think is how I'd keep it that way. I'd keep them on SmackDown, but it's just interesting that dynamic is there. And also interesting how, maybe Roman wants him on SmackDown, but they don't get picked till late, just to like prove a point by Roman. It's very interesting, that one. Really interesting. Another interesting one, Bianca Belair coming over to SmackDown. Now, mainly because she's the Raw Women's Champion. Rhea and Judgment Day were not eligible for this draft. They're going to be drafted on Monday. So will we? I think logic dictates that Rhea's going to go to Raw. And so they've got the belt situation again. Personally, I don't like the fact that there's a blue and a red belt. I would rather they had two separate women's titles with different names. You could even have just a SmackDown women's just a women's champion and a Universal women's champion or something. And then you have two generic belts, and they can switch. I mean, you don't need this, because obviously Bianca Belair can't have the Women's Championship on SmackDown, and Rhea can't have the SmackDown Women's Championship on Raw. So there needs to be some swap somewhere, unless they have Rhea go to SmackDown, and we have two champions on SmackDown and one on Raw, and maybe Queen Zelina Vega does win the belt at Backlash and goes to Raw. Who knows? But yeah, it's just a interesting situation. I don't mind them changing champions, but they did this in the last draft. They changed the women's champions around. Maybe not needed, but we'll see the rest of the draft. The Street Profits went to SmackDown, probably once Bianca Belair had been drafted, quite a predictable pick. And interesting, the first three picks from both brands were top women's tag teams. Yeah, it was very formulaic. Next up is Edge coming to SmackDown. So obviously he made his name on SmackDown, originally the original SmackDown crew. So a good draft pick. But so far we're seeing a lot of Raw go over to SmackDown. So actually the landscape doesn't change massively, because we're seeing a lot of people who were together on Raw just be together on SmackDown. You see it with quite a few of these draft picks. Bobby Lashley up next. Now, this is what I'm actually really looking forward to, because Lashley v Roman is a match I would want to see for the Undisputed Universal title. And I think Lashley, I don't know if he's been on SmackDown before. This feels very different to me. So, yeah, really interesting one for Lashley. And interesting that we move him away from, I mean, he's been around Theory for a while now. We'll probably get to Theory in a bit, actually, because there was another title changing brands. But yeah, with Gunther going to Raw, the IC belt has gone to Raw, which again, logic dictates the US Championship goes to SmackDown, which is Austin Theory currently. But we do have the triple threat match at Backlash, which Bobby Lashley is in. So maybe Lashley wins the belt at Backlash and brings the belt to SmackDown, and you keep Theory on Raw. Because I'm kind of a bit done with Theory and Lashley constantly going back and forth. That could be a way you do it, and then you put Theory in that in the contention for that new World Heavyweight Championship on Raw, which is obviously another thing that comes from Roman going to SmackDown, is that new championship is on Raw now. We know that. I think that was widely predicted, but that is now a fact. So Lashley on SmackDown, interesting. I kind of skipped over Edge a bit, but we'll see what happens with Edge. Hopefully Judgment Day stay on Raw, which I think with Belair makes sense. We need to get Edge away from Judgment Day. So yeah, one of them needed to move. The next one actually was actually a bit of an underwhelming return for AJ Styles, I would say. The OC got drafted, so all four of them. But there wasn't like a big AJ Styles return. It was just, oh, he's in the draft and he's on SmackDown. And then he kind of came out and, was about to speak, and then Viking Raiders interrupted, and then there's a brawl between OC and Viking Raiders. And I think next week on SmackDown we've got match official. I think that's just a good way for the OC to announce themselves to SmackDown. I don't think that means there's a feud coming up. I think it's just an opening match for the OC. But still a cool one again. AJ Styles, someone I would personally associate with SmackDown, the house that AJ Styles built. And again, another fresh opponent for Roman Reigns. AJ, I know we've done Edge Roman before, but I think that we could run that one back. And Bobby Lashley. So there's three interesting opponents for Roman. And also Li Shin as well. Probably just I think she's done really well to be grouped with the other three, to be honest with you, to get drafted this early on. The next one's interesting because we've seen a lot of rumours, you know, there's been a lot of hints that Damage Control will be split up, but they all got drafted together, which I was surprised by. I'd have liked to have seen them split them up, and you draft either Io or Bailey as a singles, and you keep the other two together and just watch the dynamics unfold. That's how I would have done it, but they've kept them together. And actually, a little bit annoyingly, they've drafted them with Belair, who they've been in a feud with since SummerSlam. So basically, that's been Damage Control's only real feud since the main roster is Becky, Bianca, Asuka, Alexa Bliss, those guys. And, you know, Bianca moving to SmackDown's quite cool, but then when you move Bailey and Damage Control with her, it's just the same feud you had on Raw, but just on SmackDown. So interesting. Obviously, the women's division didn't get a big showing in this draft, so I'm interested to see. You know, we've got like Charlotte, Asuka, a lot of top Liv Morgan, Raquel, Ronda, Shayna. There's a lot of top women still to be drafted. So, and potential NXT call up. So, the women's division, we still don't quite know the full picture yet. But I was just very surprised by this one. I wouldn't have drafted them together. I wouldn't have drafted them on the same brand as Bianca Belair either. So that one was a surprise. And the last SmackDown pick was actually a big surprise. This was the first NXT draft pick. And it's the NXT Women's Tag Team Champions, Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, who I think in themselves 100% deserve to call up. I think they work pretty well as a team. Alba Fire has been main roster ready for a little while now. Isla Dawn is an interesting one because she's quite new to NXT. She'd come up in the last 12 months, feuded with Alba Fire, then teamed with her, become champions. And I think their team is really cool. It's really dark. Just they work really well together, those two. So, and also a tag team on the main roster, which is needed. And also, when they were drafted, we got a setup for a tag team title match on NXT, NXT match made on SmackDown, which is quite cool. Qatada, Chancellor, Caden Carter said, "You're not taking those belts with you. We'll challenge you for a match." So maybe they lose the bet, drop the belts to Qatada and Caden, maybe on NXT. I actually think I'd call them up with the belts, and then you do a match with them against Liv and Raquel, and we just merge back to one women's tag team title belt. I don't think you need two. And you have to, women's tag team champions go on NXT from time to time, go Raw, SmackDown, they go everywhere. Like, you know, the Sasha Bailey periods at the start of the tag team title, which is probably the best period for it. So that's what I would do, but interesting to see what they do with that. But yeah, interesting call up, Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. All right, if we go to Raw's picks, Cody Rhodes, not a surprise, Raw's first pick. Away from Roman, interesting. And he is very likely, well, I would say 100% likely to be in that new title tournament, multi-man match, whatever they do. I think they should do a tournament for what's worth. I'd like to see a bracket tournament, 8 people go for it, and then a one-on-one match at Night of Champions. But Cody Rhodes on Raw, away from Roman. Becky Lynch also on Raw. Yeah, away from Belair and Bailey. That's good for Becky Lynch. I was talking about Bianca and Bailey. Becky and Bailey have been going for a while, so keep Becky away, give her a new feud. And actually, Raw's women's division, there's only 2 women drafted, whereas SmackDown had 4, 5, 6, 7 because of they drafted 2 teams. So Raw drafted 2 singles, so 7 women on SmackDown compared to 2 on Raw. So we really don't know the state of the Raw women's division yet. But Becky away from Belair and Bayley is good, and we could assume that Seth is going to go to Raw with Becky and Seth being a couple. We've seen it with Belair and Montez Ford on SmackDown, so that's going to be a good one. We'd like to see Seth on Raw away from Roman with this new belt. The next pick was probably my favourite pick of the whole draft, actually. Imperium to Raw. Now, I've said on a few podcasts now that Gunther on SmackDown with Roman's actually a little bit annoying because Gunther should be the dominant guy in his faction. And he's always playing second fiddle to Roman. So get him away from Roman. The IC belt now on Raw, that's fine. And yeah, Gunther, I think Imperium as a tag team should get a bit more of a showing as well. I'd like to see them have a little tag team title run or a feud with KO and Sammy or whatever they do with the tag team belts. Yeah, a very cool pick, and I think a much needed one, in my opinion. That would have been high up on my list of draft picks to do, Imperium to Raw. Matt Riddle next for Raw. Interestingly, away from Solo. So we saw Matt Riddle interfere in that match in the main event. Obviously, they've got the 6-man at Backlash. That's probably the end of the Riddle Solo feud, and then Riddle moves on to something else. Maybe, again, another contender for this new title tournament, multi-man match Riddle. Yeah, probably a good pick for that. The next one, Drew McIntyre coming from SmackDown. Needed a refresh. Obviously, we don't know the destination of the Brawling Brutes yet, but I think it's probably about time to separate him from Sheamus. They've been interlinked for so long now, it's probably best they do separate things. Although saying that, Gunther's come across with the IC belt, so maybe Sheamus comes and chases the IC belt on Raw, potentially. But Drew's another one you expect to see in that title, new World Heavyweight Championship title picture from the get-go, you think. Probably needs a bit of a character refresh, maybe a heel turn for Drew, but Drew on Raw is a good decision. The Miz stays on Raw. I haven't got much to say about that one. Again, someone else you can probably put in that title match. Shinsuke Nakamura is the next Raw pick, which is, again, a bit of a cool one because he's been on SmackDown for quite a while now, Nakamura. I probably made this point before, but I'd have liked to have seen his return delayed until the draft. I wouldn't have brought him back 2 weeks before the draft. But he's back. Although seeing what he did with AJ, maybe it would just be underwhelming if he'd have come back on the draft. Got attacked by Karrion Kross backstage on this SmackDown, and they've got a match for next week, probably just that. That feels like a very mini feud if that's going to be blown off next week. Unless Kross comes to Raw with Shinsuke, but yeah, they've got the match next week. And the last pick from Raw is Indy Hartwell, which, if you are long-term listeners to the pod, you will know my views on Indy Hartwell. She needed a call-up. She's been ready probably before, definitely before Dexter Lumis, but she could have come up with Gargano and Candice when they came up. She's been ready for so long. And again, interestingly, the NXT Women's Champion is up. So the 2 NXT call-ups are both champions. So really keen to see what they do with this women's title, because Indy Hartwell's just defended it at Spring Break in a multi-person match. She could have easily lost it there, then got called up. They had her retain. Now she's called up. Does she just drop it and we get a new women's champion down the line? Although the women's championship in NXT has flip-flopped a bit with Roxanne winning, then dropping, then Indy winning. So I feel like her dropping it straight after Roxanne dropped it recently would be a bit. And obviously we had Mandy not too long ago drop it as well. So yeah, a few short title reigns in the women's division on NXT, but Indy Hartwell is up and much needed. I presume this means, or at least I hope, Johnny, Candice, Dexter stay on Raw and we get the Way on the main roster, because Indy Hartwell will make something of Dexter Lumis. Like, that is needed. And Indy and Candice as a tag team, it all just makes complete sense to me. But a very, very good call-up. Yeah, very good call-up. So we've got, obviously, I mentioned at the start, we've got the other draft picks that weren't drafted on the show but are still eligible to be drafted now. They're going down on SmackDown Lowdown. So keep an eye out on our Twitter for that, because we'll be tweeting when those draft picks are announced. Again, I expect there'll be lower roster members, but there'll probably be some interesting ones. And I don't actually have the names that are up to be drafted there in front of me, but I think that'll be interesting. And then Monday Night Raw is where it will all conclude, but there'll probably be draft picks after Raw, as there always is. But the big dogs, so your likes of Seth, your likes of Charlotte, Rhea, Judgment Day, who else is there? Shayna, Ronda. There's a lot of big picks still to be made, and the interesting part now for me is probably Raw, because this vacant title, the main men's title, is vacant, and we are going to see who is going to be up for it. I've already said Drew, Riddle, Miz, Cody, Nakamura. They're all names that will be in and around that picture already, and you'd expect Seth to be there as well. So yeah, very interesting. A good first night of the draft. Not as many names as I'd have expected to be picked, and not too many. Like the two NXT call-ups for me, Alba and Isla Dawn was surprising. India Hartwell, well, I guess it is surprising because she's champion. Just interesting they've got two champs called up, which, like, when you're thinking NXT call-ups, I kind of didn't include the champions because I thought they'll stay down. But if they're calling champions up, then maybe we'll see Carmelo. I mean, Wesley, they're the other champions. Who would attack the champions? Gallus, they're probably going to get called up. But yeah, we expect to see Pretty Deadly, I think, after this week's NXT, where they were killed off on the show. Yeah. Well, it's just interesting to see who else gets called up. But a good start, and I wonder whether there'll be any NXT call-ups in this back off camera call-ups from SmackDown Lowdown as well. But we'll be back. I will definitely be back with a draft recap from Monday Night Raw as well, to see what goes down there. But exciting time. Draft's one of my kind of favorite periods. It's a real chance to shake things up, rivalries get renewed. It feels like a complete reset, and this is now the start of the new year of WWE TV, and it looks promising with Raw. You've got Cody, Gunther, Drew, Becky, like big names at the top. Then you've got the Bloodline, Belair, Lashley, Edge, AJ, or Bailey on SmackDown. So looks good. Very excited for Monday Night Raw. If you don't follow us on Twitter, give us a follow at Recharge Wrestle, where we will be reacting to anything that goes on in the meantime. We'll be reacting. If you don't follow us on YouTube already, if you've just come across this video, like, subscribe, search Recharge Wrestling, or just click on the logo below. And we're going to have loads more video content coming out. We have got Money in the Bank coming up. Hopefully, AEW All In will be attending as well. So there'll be content from those shows coming up. Hopefully, be some more WWE 2K22 content coming out, and just general reaction videos to the world of professional wrestling. So hopefully, you've enjoyed that. Like, subscribe, and we will see you guys next time.